Hello everyone, my name is Eden Ocean and welcome to Film Insights, the podcast where I bring on passionate filmmakers to discuss all the work that goes into creating their beautiful works of art. We'll be discussing everything from inspiration in their creative process, execution, and the challenges encountered on set. And lastly, we'll always finish off with a reflection of their film to see how close or far the final result may have swayed from the initial conception. This week, my guest is a dear friend of mine, an exciting young and upcoming director, Joshua Casale, who will be here to talk about his incredible new, successful short film, Happy Together, which he both wrote and directed, this film being his last student film from Sheridan College before graduating this year. Before we jump into the film, though, a quick introduction to Joshua. Joshua Casale is a passionate, young Italian-Canadian filmmaker from Milton, Ontario, Canada, whose love of film extends back to his earliest of memories. As an only child, Joshua's young imagination was always hard at work, creating dozens of characters to accompany him and worlds for him to explore. One of his earliest film icons was George Lucas, and at just age 6, little Joshua had already begun to start writing and filming his own version of Episode 7 of the prestigious Star Wars series, only to later be frustrated that someone else would beat him to it. Speaking to Josh was an absolute delight. His passion and drive for filmmaking truly radiates off of him, and after only talking to him for a short while, I already was feeling inspired to pick up a pen and a camera. It is incredible to see just how much Joshua can achieve on screen with a small budget, and a limited time frame, with this film being shot over just 3 days. He is the definition of resourceful, and an unbelievably impressive representation of the next generation of budding film writers and directors. I can't wait to see where this young man's career will go. Now then, let's talk about his breakout film, Happy Together. This 12-minute drama follows the story of a young woman named Donna, played by Natasha Krishnan, who finds herself quickly caught in an incredibly abusive relationship with James, played by Richard Beltry. Throughout the film, we witness Donna cautiously navigate the horrors of domestic violence. This incredibly realistic story plays with our emotions like a roller coaster ride, where, after watching it, you find it incredible that only 12 minutes have passed. Joshua takes us from the brief highs of lust to the dark horrors of domestic abuse, escalating from emotional manipulation, physical abuse, and then even gun violence. Currently making its festival run, Happy Together has already become a part of the official selection of many impressive film festivals, such as the Listoff Global Network Sessions 2020 Film Festival, the Montreal Indie Short Film Awards, the Toronto Short Film and TV Channel Festival, the First Time Filmmaker Sessions Festival, the Flick Fair On Demand Film Festival, and I'm sure by the time this episode comes out, there may be another one to add to the list. This film is genuinely rocketing. If you haven't seen the film, I'm telling you, you have to see it. If you can, try to check it out at one of those film festivals. Most of the screenings have been transferred to online viewings due to COVID-19, so now's your chance. And be sure to check this video's description to follow Joshua's social channels for updates. He says the film should arrive on his website, joshuacasale.com, for free viewing sometime in January 2021. Alright then, that's enough introductions. I hope you enjoy our conversation. First off, huge congratulations on how successful the film is currently doing. Lots of really notable film festivals. It's part of the official selection.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we've had some really good luck with that, and it's kind of funny because out of everybody from our year, every time you kind of look at other people's work, you're like, oh my God, mine is like the worst. You know what I mean? So the fact that not only our professors had some good faith in us, but like also other people that are in the film industry and film professionals that are running these festivals also thought the same. So as like my first taste of success, it was really cool.
You talk about that like nervousness and comparing yourself. How does it feel now that your film is being seen by like larger and larger audience sizes and of, critical audiences too? These are film festival viewers.
I think it's awesome because as filmmakers, especially as new filmmakers, all of us are kind of looking for those signs that we do belong here. You know what I mean? We're looking for that one comment that somebody makes that's like, wow, that's really good. That shows us that our work isn't just for nothing. So I think big names and big audiences getting to see it. First of all, it's a story that thematically I think really needs to get told. And I know that's a cliche thing to say, but just for the subject matter alone and the climate we're in, I really think this story needs to get told, and hopefully the message can span across multiple people. So we'll see. If it starts opening up doors, it would be amazing. But if not, just even that, it getting into festivals as like a first taste of like, okay, maybe I am meant to be here. It just spurs on me to want to create more. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked a little bit about how the subject matter, and that's something that I want to go into right away. Uh, right back to the beginning, we're going to go to the writing process, and you're credited of co-writing and co-directing with Bianca Harris. So, if you don't mind, can you run me through what the writing process with Bianca Harris was like, and who initially had the inspiration for this film?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit of the pre-production and then feed that into the writing process. So Bianca Harris basically approached me a year or so before it was even going to be pitched, and she said she'd never directed before. She's a writer, but she's never directed before, and for her directorial debut, she wanted me to actually just do it on my own. And I had ended up telling her that it's her story because the whole film is basically based off of a past relationship that she had. Of course, it's dramatized and it's put into formatting and structure that makes sense for film. But the inspiration came from a past experience that she had, of course, with both mental and physical abuse. And it was almost a therapeutic process for her to write that. So I joined the project, and I needed her to basically, I wanted that female perspective and her side of the story because it is her story to really help, motivate the actors, maybe look at things that I'm not seeing, and just having that different perspective, I think really helped. So in terms of the writing process, it was really interesting, the dichotomy between the two of us, because I'm very much like, I did my research, but and read a lot of stories, but I would say I was a little bit more visual, and I was a little bit more like surface level, right? As she would help with like the nuances and like, oh, what would he say in this moment? And because she's lived through those experiences, she knew exactly what he would say. She knew exactly what she would say. How they would react to one another, and yeah, it was just it was quite fascinating. We went through multiple drafts because our prof would look at it and he would make small changes here and there, and the first version we had was really quite raw.
I
And
can only imagine, yeah.
yeah, it was really raw, but like because it was raw, there wasn't as much structure and it wasn't as cinematic, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? It was more of like I would say it was written almost like a novel
Hmm.
to begin with, if that makes sense, where it just there was no real, this results in this and this results in this. It was just a series of moments, and it was just this feeling that you got. And it was this feeling of like grossness and this feeling of like, wanting her to escape this relationship. So I think just shaping it into not only something cinematic in terms of visual, but also something that the actors can actually grasp and they can actually hold on to, that's not too scarring. And we only had uh, 3 days to shoot the full 12-minute film, so a lot of those heavy dialogue scenes and a lot of those very raw shots, it's not like we would give the actors time to process in or after, because they would just be there for the straight 3 days. So I think the way that it turned out, we're really happy with. There's some things that, of course, you go back and you're like, I wish I would have kept that in, or I wish we didn't cut that out. But the finished product, I'm really proud of.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that are going to watch it are going to be really proud that they had watched it. Of course, touchy subject matter. It's something that you don't want to get wrong. A lot of people, suffer through these types of issues, and you have to be careful not to offend people. So having a writer that's had authentic experience can really help through the entirety of the process. But that being said, you still were brought on as a co-writer. Is there anything that you guys had trouble deciding on, in maybe not with the subject matter, but maybe the way a scene plays out? A lot of different things that happen in this film. Anything you guys have a hard time deciding on?
Yeah, so basically, as you were saying, just going back to you saying it's very touchy subject matter, it was, and me being a male and telling a female story was something that I was interested in doing, but I also wanted that other perspective because I don't want to be giving a female on an event that I've never actually gone through. Like I've thankfully never gone through any abuse or anything like physical or mental. So just getting that other perspective to, help giving direction to the actors helped a lot. In terms of writing, originally some of the first drafts that were written was she would, how do I say this? Our main character would like fantasize things happening. So she would fantasize that he comes home and he's beautiful to her and her life is so good. And then it would hard cut to what that reality really was. Right? If that makes sense. Like we had the mom in the beginning, where she had her mom and it just started to get darker and darker. Like the mom at one point would just say, "Oh, like why don't you just kill him?" And then it would hard cut to what the mom would actually say, and it was her, envisioning and praying for what she hoped would happen. And so we went back and forth on that because in the end we both felt that that's a lot stronger if we can show it through the performances and if we can show it through the actor's face. And clearly she wants that better life, but she's so manipulated that she's not even thinking about it. The writing process was really, really smooth. Like there was no big discussions or arguments between us. But yeah, I was pretty happy with it.
Great to hear that there wasn't any arguments, and I'm glad that the script ended the way it did. I think that the context is scary enough without these kind of visions or hallucinations that you're speaking of. Although I do think that would make a very interesting film. But I'm quite happy with the way it turned out as well. Moving on though. So the script is now finished,
Mm.
and let's move on to developing the director's vision for the project. And with this film and with a lot of films, it's usually fair to say that the tone, being how the audience is going to feel, is the most important, most vital aspect to get right. So, if you could talk me through some of the ideas that you had that you wanted to implement in order to make sure that tone was brought across, whether it's in your colors or your location, framing, whichever.
Yeah, so a big inspiration for this film, directorially, I would say visually was Gone Girl. But then acting wise would be more of like a marriage story if you saw those things. So essentially, the location, if you watch it, it's this beautiful house, big, beautiful, and we wanted to make that house essentially like the allegory for that whole relationship of like this perfect house, this perfect man. He's got a good job. Everything is great. Even our shots are like perfect, right? They're like locked off, great shots, and it's like nothing is wrong here. And we hoped that that would create this feeling that they're almost engulfed by their surroundings, if that makes sense. Like the house itself played a character within because she can't escape this on paper perfect life, but in reality, horrible life. And so I think nailing that tone of like having it kind of nice and slow, like the pacing isn't huge. It's just taking pauses here and there and then processing what each other are saying and playing one-upsmanship on one another, or him playing one-upsmanship on her. And yeah, I just the house was a big part visually. I think the look of the actors was a big part visually, and then tone wise and pacing wise, a nice slow burn. Because a story like this, I feel like you just kind of need to sit with the characters, right? You kind of need to be there, and we wanted that feeling of like this is like a fly on the wall of their relationship. And if people are looking in, it looks perfect. Every camera movement is perfect. Everything about this is perfect. And I almost want the audience to feel a little bit conflicted, right? Like, okay, she's in this horrible situation, but hey, maybe they would say anyone would die to be in a gorgeous house like that. And it's funny because a lot of the viewings that I've shown to people, the first thing they say is like, "Wow, what a nice house." You know what I mean? So they right away are like thrown by this great house, the same way she was. So we wanted to really put our viewers into, or put our main character into the minds of our viewers, where they're almost thinking the same thing as her, and they're as conflicted as her.
Yeah, and you were talking about how it's so large, and at least to me as a viewer, it kind of accentuated this sort of emptiness feeling. And of course, it was properly decorated, but it didn't quite feel very lived in. It's very, very modern. Everything was very clean. It almost kind of created this like creepiness about it. Especially how I imagine you when you framed Donna, your main character, played by Natasha Krishnan. Uh, she'd always appear so small in this really, really these big rooms like you were describing. So I definitely think that that played up that a lot.
Thank you. I'm really glad that came through because if you also notice directorially, we would also put her in colors that were like a lot of beiges and a lot of grays and stuff that she would basically blend into her environment. So when you looked at her, she never really popped. At the beginning, she popped. At the beginning, she was at the bar. If you watch it, she's very, you know, open and in touch with her body. And then in the end, she covers up more and more and more, and almost becomes one with the environments. And yeah, I was pretty happy with how that turned out. And I'm glad you noticed that it does feel small. It does feel creepy. It feels a bit off, but the house was so big, and I like that dichotomy of even though you're in such a beautiful house, that kind of thing doesn't matter when you're in such a horrible situation.
Now, student film,
Mm.
not the largest budget. I imagine that it must have been very difficult to acquire all these locations, the house, and was the house taking up a lot of the budget? How did you go about getting that within your budget?
It was actually one of our crew members, Will. He's one of my favorite people on earth. But yeah, it was one of our crew members' house. We had visited earlier that summer, and when we were looking for houses, we were looking. We had this idea in mind that we wanted this beautiful house. We wanted it to be, very large, almost like this, not Victorian-esque house, but just a house that you would go in and immediately you'd be taken aback.
Something that
So
screams money, right?
yeah, yeah, something that screams perfection, but almost again, as you said, wasn't lived in. Like something where it feels like a house and not a home, if that makes sense. It's cold.
Okay.
And so we would look on Airbnbs and all these houses, man, for like 3 days we're going for like $2,000-3,000, these beautiful houses. And then that was if and we would have to book it first and then ask if we could film there. And then ask if we can film an abusive drama in there, you know what I mean? Where a woman is getting hit
Oh
uh,
gosh.
within their house, right? So that's a big, big commitment for anybody to make. And us just being students again and not being, it's not like we're a big Hollywood film set, right? We're nobodies. So they have no idea what we're doing there. So the fact that we asked Will and his beautiful family allowed us to use that house for 3 days was like such a good get. And they didn't charge us anything. They were so kind to us. They would cook us food. They were just I think they had a fun time. Like his sister would come out and she would yell cut, and she would she would help us direct and stuff. So I think she had a good time, and yeah, we were just really really lucky that that took little to no money out of the budget. If you want to talk about budgeting a little bit more, I can describe where that money went to.
Yeah, well, what were some of the key items?
Yeah, so a lot of the props, again, we went for this more minimalist approach. If you look, like it's just few things here and there, and we did place them very strategically. But it's funny because a lot of the props that we did have, we ended up cutting a lot of those scenes out. There was a scene where he had put rose petals all the way down the hall as she
Wow.
walked in, and it's the scene right before he proposes that she walks in and she's all like, "Oh, what's this?" But something like that alone was like $20 in rose petals. You know what I mean? You don't think that, like, oh my god, that
So
really
did you end up
bleeds.
buying the rose petals?
We did end up buying the rose petals, and we actually shot that scene, but it didn't work out. Other than that, the gun, that was a big expense. We got it from Meg. It was a real gun, but
Oh gosh.
it's, I don't know the word for it, disassembled, so you're not able actually
Yeah,
to,
disabled and whichever, so it can't fire.
yeah, so it can't fire. So if someone on the crew got rowdy, we would be,
It's enough paperwork as it is when it doesn't
oh
fire.
my
We don't
god.
need any accidents happening.
Yeah, so that was a big chunk of the budget. But other than that, it was just because it was a 3 day shoot, and because we had a big crew. We had like
Yeah, it's
15.
15 to 20 people on set alone.
So feeding them, that was what bled into our budget a lot. Now Bianca would make like chili, or I would make chicken. You know what I mean? But still, just getting those ingredients and dealing with food, and making
Absolutely.
sure the crew was happy for the full, like we were shooting like 12-hour days. That was the big budget killer. But I don't know, man. This low budget, like, kind of indie feeling to this film is, it helped us in terms of like our pocketbooks. And
It doesn't feel
and
very
on
low budget when you watch it, though. That's not the impression you get.
oh, thank you. I'm really glad. But yeah, it was low budget, and I think having a low budget forces you to be creative instead of just being able to buy your way out of certain
Sticky
situations.
situations, yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, why don't you just build a room for us to have this scene in? It was like, okay, let's figure out how we're gonna shoot this scene with no time, no budget, and be as creative and as productive as possible. So I really, really think that added to it. And if anyone's looking to shoot a short film, or one of their first, I think doing like a low budget, just dramatic story between a couple people is I've learned so much from it. Just having this low budget and being forced to on the fly make these changes, because it'd be something like we'd run out of batteries, or it would be something like,
Oh, God.
oh yeah, right, like stuff that you didn't prepare for before. And it's like, okay, well, spend $10 on batteries or spend $10 on that. Or it's, hey, how do we work around it? How do we get away with not having that giant crane shot? How do we get away with not having this piece of equipment or that piece of equipment?
Yeah, it forces you to become very resourceful, and it's a really important skill to have, especially when you're fronting a team. Everyone's looking to you for answers.
Hmm.
And so you talked about how you only have a few characters. I want to move into that for a bit. Uh, I imagine actors, unpaid, willing to do this for their demo reels and for the experience that they can get, work on their craft. Is that correct?
Hmm.
All right, so because the actors were not paid, also huge props on finding some wonderful talent. We of course have our star Natasha Krishnan playing Donna. James is played by Richard Veltri, and the supporting character Allison played by Monique Felsenloben. And so I'd love you to walk us through the casting process, because as a student film, you're auditioning these higher end union member actors. It's a little nerve wracking because you want to make sure that you find an actor that's good enough for you, but you also want to you feel like you're auditioning for them in a sense too, don't you?
Yeah. I actually have a funny story about that. We were originally set to shoot November, or yeah, November, like late November 2019. That was when our shooting time was. We had all the actors, except all the same actors except for Natasha, and our lead girl was actually completely different. Um, and the day before, like 24 hours before, she had backed out, and something came up with her. I can't even really remember right now, but something came up, and we were forced to either recast then and there. And again, being student actors, it's not like we have a list of great actors just by contact, or push the shooting date. And so we ended up pushing the shooting date until after the new year. So then we ended up shooting in like January, early January, and we did a recast of the main character, and that's when we found Natasha. So honestly, it was like a blessing in disguise, and she just nailed it out of the park. And in terms of you saying it's almost like we're auditioning for them, I agree 100%. Like something I always look for is, can they take direction? So I would, say, okay, do the scene again, but this time you feel this way, or this time, he said this to you, and it affected you in this way. And she just, they all just nailed that. And then a big thing also was improv. We would improv a lot of scenes. So I would say, okay, you're going to start with this line. And then I would throw out, or Ander was, he was helping us. He was one of our producers. He was doing the line readings at the table readings. He would throw out a random line, and then they would improvise back. And it was just like, it fit perfectly. And we were really, really happy. And then I think what helped us too, because I think they have a great on-screen chemistry. Sorry, they have a great on-screen chemistry. What helped us a lot was, and again, given that time that we had, we brought them both in for a table read a week beforehand. So they had met each other. We had coffee with each other. It was me, Bianca, and the two main actors. We had coffee, we talked, and we started to get a feel for one another. And then we did the table read. We ran through it 3 or 4 times, and I think they really, really, really started to click with one another, and they liked each other, which was nice. And their chemistry, thank God, um, really, really came through. And I think that table reading was a big reason that not only did they nail so many of their lines, even though I have all the faith in the world that they would have anyways, but that they could play a little bit, and change the way that they say things a little bit, and have a little bit more fun with it, knowing that they have trust in one another. That if one tries something a little bit different, the other one will say, okay, I understand, I'm going to take it this way, but they still have that same chemistry. So I was just there. There's something about filmmaking that when you get a good performance and the camera's rolling, everybody's quiet, and they're just putting in one of the best performances of their life. It's like the air just like fills, if you know what I mean. Like the room just fills, even though it's so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. But when there's a good performance, it just stops everything around you, and you're just enthralled by how phenomenal these actors were. And to be honest with you, that was us with them. We would give them, I would say, little to no direction. It would be small things like, remember what he said to you, or she acted this way, so I want you to be a little bit more coy. But it was never like, pulling the performance out of them. It was this already amazing performance that we were just chipping at and chipping at to get something, even better, or something that we thought fit the story. And I think I just think they nailed it for a student film. Even a lot of some of my past stuff, the acting has been not as phenomenal, but that comes both with my inexperience in directing actors, and that comes from them wanting to be in a short film, and wanting to grow in both ability and their career. But these guys were like seasoned vets. Anything we said to them, they internalized, and then nailed it. So the casting process was great. The actual acting process was phenomenal, and it was an all-star cast. And Natasha was an absolute like we. I could not imagine anyone better in her place, and I could not imagine the first person that we had casted playing that role, not as well, but playing that role the way she did, which really, really helped with the pacing and the tone of the story. And I was so pleased.
Yeah, it's honestly incredible towards some of those latter scenes, just how many emotions this
Hmm.
woman can put on her face during a moment. You'll see some stills, and you can list off like 35 different emotions that she's experiencing by
Yeah,
a single
yeah.
moment. It's really, and it's all in the subtleties too, which a lot of actors take a long time to pick up. So it's incredible that you were able to sort of massage this performance out of her.
And what's so incredible too was we were shooting for 3 days. So that means, say we did 3 scenes in a day. The first scene, she's happy. All right, play it happy, do it like this. 2 hours later, all right, now, he just hit you. This is how you feel. And then after that, okay, you're relieved, play it that way. So she not only had that range and those beautiful subtleties, but she could
Transition.
beautifully. And she was a little shook after a lot of the shooting days, right? She needed that time to just mellow out and because they really did put themselves within their characters. Like when he was on set, he was almost like really method. He was pacing back and forth, and I would give him direction. He said, "Okay, I got it. Let's just get on with the scene." And I remember he was great to work with, but a scene where you put yourself in the head of someone who abuses women and nail it has got to be so hard on you. And afterwards, he would say to me, even though he wasn't mean at all, he would say like, "Sorry if I was a little snappy. It's hard to be in that mindset." So between both of them, the ranges of emotion that they went through, I was blown away because they could do that within the span of 3 days and a table read. You know what I mean? So I was really, really, really blown away.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about Natasha, but Richard Belcher, who played James, he was incredible too. He scared me when I was watching. I was genuinely afraid, even though I was afraid for her. I was afraid for myself. I thought he was going to come through the screen. Uh, but let's move on. We've talked a lot about pre-production. We've gone through the casting. I want to get to production. This is the juicy stuff. Can you remember arriving on day one? You enter the location wherever you're starting. Your crew's all there. Walk us through it.
Okay, so a lot of the stuff might be fuzzy because when I'm directing, I'm just like it's like a haze right after it's done.
You become an
Right?
animal with instincts.
Yeah, no, really, man. Like it's like I'm on like drugs. You know what I
Get me
mean?
my
Like
coffee. Where's my
this is
script?
yeah, this is my drug, dude. And
Yeah.
then afterwards, I'm like, what the hell just happened? Like I feel good, but I don't even remember the last
Yeah,
three
you
days.
look to your left and there's like five crying production assistants.
Yeah, yeah, it's all because of me. But yeah, yeah. So first day we shot was Monahan's. It was a bar in Oakville, and it was actually the first scene of the film. So at that point, we walked in. It was 6 a.m. because the bar doesn't open till 12. So most of the crew had gotten up at like 4:30. We had got there. We got our coffee, and I don't know. It was just go time. The whole crew was so quick. They knew exactly what needed to get done, and they just nailed it. And then it was me and Bianca basically walking them through the blocking. And the moment I knew that this film, without sounding cocky, the moment I knew that this film was going to be a success, or was going to be something that we were going to be proud of, was when we were going through blocking and both the actors were suggesting things. Why don't I do this? Why don't I do it this way? Oh, that would be great if, he had the higher ground here and she had the lower ground. At that point, I knew this was a collaboration. This was four minds helping each other out instead of two, plus, the rest of the crew. And it would just was like, wow, I was blown away how how simple it came. Like it wasn't hard to figure out where they go. We all just kind of knew. We just knew, okay, he has to stand here, she has to stand here. All right, you're gonna go this way because of this, and that. So that first day, I know you want some juicy stories, but everything went amazing. The crew was amazing. Like we had no hiccups. The owner of Monaghan's was so nice to us. He was offering us drinks even though it was like 7 a.m. But we're not going to talk about whether we partaked in those or not. Um,
All right, so
but
so let's stay on this positive road.
yeah,
You got your 7 a.m. The crew that you said they're all doing great. If you had to name an MVP in that bar, who in the crew was giving you the most?
crew. I'd say the camera crew alone. Like Emily Jenkins, our DOP, she just nailed it. And with her direction and her leading the camera crew, like the first scene, we have a big jib shot where you see the pool, I guess the pool cue it's called, yeah, the pool cue breaking. And the first thing they did was it was Chris Barecki that was helping us set that camera up, and then Emily leading them. That camera crew, man, I've never seen people so quick in their life, and they just knew what to do. It was like they were reading my mind. Like they could tell. I would look at a shot, and I would say, "Oh, can you get the another lens?" And they'd already be standing behind me with the
They
lens
look
that
at your
I
face and they know what you
yeah
like before you decide if you've liked it.
yeah. And a lot of the crew I'd worked with before. I'd never worked with Emily, but Bianca had. But me and Emily just had that understanding. And then Chris Barecki, who was pulling focus, he just knew what we liked in and out of focus. Like he knew at some scenes I would want him to rack right out of focus, and he would make suggestions. The whole camera crew would come up to us and they would make suggestions, and I loved it. Because when I'm directing, I'm always looking for someone to prove me wrong, someone to give me a better idea. Because we're only two people, me and Bianca. So if a camera person said, okay, we have the jib shot, but what if we do it from this angle instead of this angle because that means this? Then I would be like, yeah, you're 100% right. I can't argue with you. So overall, I don't have any singular names other than Emily, but the camera team was incredible. And everyone was incredible overall, but the camera thoroughly impressed me throughout the full 3 days. Like they were just an engine. They were never exhausted. They were always just grinding. They
With
were
their
working
instrument.
hard. Yeah. And a lot of this too, the deeper we go in, was we did two cameras. So essentially we would do two cameras because for like the scene where he hits her, we didn't want to have to go through that 9, 10 different times, both emotionally and physically for them. And also we didn't have time, but we didn't want to have to go through that scene so many times that she would have to fall no longer organically, but she would have to fall perfectly to match each camera angle. So
Yeah,
we
very
set up
complicated blocking.
yeah, and so we set up two cameras, and Emily was manning one of them, and then Sean Nicholas uh, was manning the other one, and it worked out. Like people just automatically assumed those roles. Like, okay, now we need someone to pull focus, and we had them there because we would have Chris pulling focus on the main camera, and then we would have someone else come in right away and pick up that spot that Chris couldn't do for the second camera. So it was just stuff like that where people would step up and they would take initiative, and they weren't scared to take on multiple roles. That I think that's what made this so successful and gave us so much of everything that we could work with. And I was really, really impressed.
All right. I want to move away from the crew, head back towards our story.
Mm.
And can you walk us through the development of James's abuse and the development of how their relationship changes? Because it escalates a lot in these short 12 minutes.
Yeah. So essentially, we had done a lot of research and we had looked at all the common ways to manipulate someone, all the common ways that abusers would abuse someone, both physically and mentally. And then we kind of just like puked them onto the page to begin with, for lack of a better term, and then we just chiseled them down. So it does escalate a lot. If you watch it, um, it says, you know, they're in a great relationship. 6 months go by, and they have their first argument. Um, because we were only given this 12-minute uh, time frame, we couldn't really do many nuances, and I feel like the first slap is what really, I hope, pulls you into the story. Like you're like, okay, where's this going? There's not a lot of conflict right now. They've hooked up. They seem like they're in a really good relationship. Bang, he hits her. Okay, there's our goal. This is what she needs to escape. And with his character too, there's small nuances that you'll see that really psychologically happen in real life. So he'll do something like, uh, she'll leave him, and his last result is to say like, I can't live without you. I'm gonna kill myself, and it'll be because of you. And
Yeah, guilt tripping,
yeah,
threatening, all sorts of.
and gaslighting, and that happens in the real world. Like you see that all the time. It's like, oh my god, I'm losing her, I gotta propose. Oh my god, like, I'm losing her, I'll lie to her and say everything is okay, and I'm gonna change. So it was a lot of action and reaction, but both from him. So his action will be to hit her, and then his reaction to that, because he noticed how she reacted, would be to apologize and to buy her flowers or to do this. So even as a viewer, you're looking at it like, okay, he's not just an outright asshole. Because if he was an outright prick, then you'd be like, just leave. You know what I mean? But
He needs to be
because
redeeming enough.
yeah, because he's redeeming enough, and because she loves him, you know, he may hit her one day, which is, I'm saying lightly, but it's not. But he may hit her one day, but then the next day he's the sweetest guy ever, and he's so nice. And she goes, "Oh, it just happened once. He's awesome. 6 days out of 7, but then that seventh day is when he snaps, and it's all calculated for him. Everything is calculated for him. Like there's a scene that we might talk about later where she drinks her wine, and right after she drinks her wine, he drinks his wine. And that is a common, if you look at psychology, and if you look at reading people's body languages, a lot of us will adopt people's mannerisms in order for them to like us a little bit more, and we'll adopt the way that they speak in order for to get that common understanding. So it almost like, it almost bonds you, it almost connects you.
Yeah, the
So
mirroring.
he would do small things like that, where it's like, oh my god, I've actually seen that in real life. Or even if you don't pick up on it subconsciously, you're like, oh my god, they're such a good couple, just from him mirroring her, right? Because it looks like, they share the same brain, or they have the same tastes. And yeah, his character was really fun to write, as horrible as that sounds. But like, making him so slimy, and making him, uh, it was literally like we were thinking, okay, what's the worst thing we can do to her psychologically now? Okay, cool. Now, what's the best thing he could do psychologically that also adds to his motivations? And then vice versa with not psychological but physical, and stuff like that. And then like not psychological but something where like it's implied, or you could just see from the look on his face what he really wants, and what his motivations are. So his character was a lot of fun to write, and I hated him as a
You
character.
hated writing it, but you just kept writing.
Yeah, yeah. And as a guy, again, I felt so gross, because I was writing with Bianca, and Bianca would say, okay, maybe he would do this. And then I would say, or she would say, okay, but then to make it even worse, what if he does this? And just those thoughts coming to my mind as a guy, right? And writing the male character, from putting myself into his perspective of like, okay, what would he say here from a man's voice was really gross. And but I think it turned out really good.
Yeah, even from his introductory shot, he's very much feels like a predator, you know, the way he's
Yeah.
looking at her across the bar in that opening shot. Anyway, so you touched a little bit about a scene. Before we began, I asked you to talk about a scene. We're going to do a little segment here where we break it down from the beginning to the end. And it's scene 6, and it's a scene where it's about in the first third of the film, I'd say. And the two of them, they're sitting down and they're just having dinner. Let's go through it together, shall we?
So, interior dining room evening. Donna and James are eating at the dinner table. James stops eating his food.
Did she see the bruises?
Yes, she did.
What did you say?
Nothing.
You sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
Good.
Donna takes a sip of water. James takes a sip of water.
You know that Allison always had a thing for me. But I didn't want her, I wanted you.
She never told me.
There's a lot she isn't telling you.
Off Donna, playing with her food.
You know, when you first selected this scene, I thought it was kind of interesting that you would choose this scene because you have a lot of scenes in this film that have a lot of, like you were saying, complicated blocking, very big visual drama. But this scene, after rewatching it, it does really feel like a turning point.
Mm-hmm. I think this scene is confirmation to the audience that she's going to stay with him. It's almost like an early she's hit rock bottom, because the scene right before, she tells her best friend that she's fine, and then she lies to him right here. And she lies for him. I apologize. And then she tells him the truth. And what I think is really, really interesting about this scene is, if we read right here, he says, "Wait, did she notice the bruise?" Currently, because he asks her that question, she has the power, right? She could say whatever she wants. She could say yes, she could say no, and whatever she answers with has major, major repercussions on him and their relationship. If she said, "Yeah, he noticed a bruise. What did you say?" "Nothing." And he says, "What did you say?" And she said, "I said that you hit me." That completely changes everything for him. You know what I mean? His plans are foiled. You don't know what Allison is going to do. Allison could call the cops. Allison could, do anything to ruin this guy's motivations. So I think when she says nothing, that's when the power is drawn away from her. And then he now psychologically cripples her when he says, "You sure?" It's almost like he's demeaning to her, like, "Oh, you're sure you said nothing?" And she says yes, and he says, "Good." And this is where he, not only has she been stabbed, but now he twists the knife a little bit more, saying, "Allison, she's always had a thing for me, but I didn't want her. I wanted you." And that goes back to that point of um, tearing you down, but then complimenting you at the same time, saying, "I wanted you, you're my one and only." But she's doing this because of this, and he's lying to her, and he's making her feel like the world that she knows isn't the world that she actually knows, isn't the way it is. And I just think visually, if you get the chance to see it, this scene is so daunting, and it's so creepy, and it feels like it's one shot the whole time when it's only three, but you're just so stuck in there, and the actors' performances are so strong. And I think the power shift is where she officially loses power for the rest of the film at this point. It is the turning point. He's now won. He knows that she's gonna lie for him. He knows that he can do this again, and she'll defend him, and she'll still stay. And her best friend is out of the picture, and he's in the clear, and now he can go even further.
And he is taking it further, even in this scene. I thought that when he said the line "good," it felt almost threatening. It's like, if she hadn't told If she had told her friend what really happened, maybe he had something planned. And then he takes it further again, and he's saying, oh, she's always had a thing for me, and then she hasn't told you a lot of things. So not only is he saying, like, you're gonna lie for me, you're gonna do what I want, but also let me put a rift between you and your friend.
Yeah, and make it seem like everything Allison says now is a lie, or yeah, you can't believe anything she says, even if she apologizes to you, or even if she says, hey, can we talk? He's now planted the seed that will always make you think she's a liar, or she's out to get your man, or XYZ. So I think that seed being planted is really, really important, because we needed to find a way to cut her out completely, the best friend, without making the best friend look like she's not even trying. You know what I mean? Like she's a horrible best friend. So I think him saying that to her would make her cut off all communication to her best friend, and would make her say, oh my God, the guy I'm with is right. And, my best friend is wrong, and she has ulterior motives. So I'm really glad that that came through to you.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. So Allison, the best friend, played by Monique Felsen-Loban, she kind of, at least for me, she's like the audience. When Allison's talking, everyone is agreeing with what she's saying. Everyone wants Donna to listen to Allison, and she becomes very important towards the end of the film. We won't spoil how it ends exactly, but what's interesting to me is now that you've spoken to me a little bit about it, is James's only true threat is Allison, because Allison might hold the information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I thought it was, at first I didn't necessarily understand why in the following scene, when Allison comes over to investigate what's going on in the household, this is a pretty important part of the film, but this is when you introduce the gun.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that, the gun's presence throughout the film.
Yeah. So the gun's present throughout the film. We wanted it to always be, from this point on, this looming idea that, oh my gosh, she has a gun, and even though he never actually uses it, it's the idea to know, oh my God, this guy is way more psycho than I would ever think. You know what I mean? He's not just psychologically mean, or physically mean, but he can go to these horrible means of even death with a gun. And him just having that gun alone, because if, say, in this next scene where he's talking to Allison, say Allison, does go against him, if he just simply eliminates her, which sounds really horrible how subtly I say it, but if he eliminates her, then he could lie about it. He could say something else happened, and now Donna is the most isolated she's ever been. You know what I mean? Now it could even be like, now she's heartbroken, and he's there to console her and to make her feel better, even though he's the cause of this whole thing. So we needed to introduce the gun anyways, because it plays a vital role later on, and it's like, introduce the gun in the first act if you're going to use it in the third, which is like the classic rule of filmmaking, and it's literally introduce the gun, which is funny. But yeah, so we wanted to do that, and I also like the imagery of that next scene where it's a picture of them together, and it's them kissing together, and then he places the gun right beside them kissing, right beside that picture. So it's almost like this visual representation of, I'm willing to do anything to keep this relationship. Like, I'm literally willing to kill people, or myself, in order to keep this relationship alive. And I really like that dichotomy between being the happiest you've ever been, and then a gun being placed right beside that picture to kind of offset it and give you that weird feeling, and to add to the tone of the story. So yeah.
Yeah, it really was dramatic from the beginning to the end. Let's save the final scenes and how it plays out for people who go and watch the film. They'll thank us for getting to experience it firsthand. But let's move over to post. We've talked about production, all that. I'd love to know a little bit about what the editing room was like because, of course, as the director, you've got your hands a little bit everywhere. And editing is very vital. It's where everything comes together. Did you have a very clear idea how you wanted the film sewn together, or perhaps did maybe one of your editors inspire you to take a scene a different direction?
So the editing process was like nothing I've ever actually gone through or experienced before because we had two editors. So that would be four people in the room with me, Bianca, and then our two editors being Gage and Madison. And essentially, what they would do, because of time constraints and um, location constraints, they would go off and they would edit their own scenes. So it'd be like Gage would have scenes 1, 4, 6, and 8, and then Madison would have all the other ones, and then they would place them together in the end. And what was hard was the pacing would be, Gage's pacing in one of them, and then Madison's pacing in the other one, or editing styles would be different, or tone would be different. And it was just really like finding like, okay, I want this edit here, and we're going to stick with this tone all the way throughout. And they were good. They were hardworking because they would do multiple versions of each scene. My biggest thing, though, being uh, one, a director, and two, I guess, a narcissist, was I wanted my hands in every pot. Like I usually would love to sit down with the editor and we cut it frame by frame together. They give me suggestions. I tell them what my overall idea is. And again, as I've said, I'd love to be proven wrong. So if they then come up with an idea that I never thought of and it changes it completely, I'm always down for that if it still fits the vision. But it was hard, man. I the edit, um even just weeks before it was done, I wasn't that happy with it. It was good. It was still a great edit, um objectively, but subjectively I was still pretty unpleased, and I felt like it was choppy. I felt like we were leaving small things in there that we didn't need, and then we were taking out big things that we did need. And so it was basically just wrangling everyone together. We had just taken a Saturday. I remember we had taken a Saturday, and I said, okay, we're just going to lock ourselves in the lab from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. I don't care. And we're just going to, you know, cut this to the point where we're all happy with it and we can make changes right then and there instead of sending our editors notes online, because notes can only go as far, and it's hard to get your vision across through a note, you know what I mean, through like a written word of like, hey, I want it done this way because of this, when they can't really sit with you, engage your emotions while you're doing it.
Yeah, especially as a young Canadian Italian director, you got to talk with your hands, right?
I know, man. And yeah, they couldn't see my facial expressions when I would say, yeah, that's great, but my face read that, it was the worst thing I've ever seen. No, but yeah.
Like the camera crew is able to do that.
Yeah, the camera crew could do that. But I'm sure they could do that because they're great editors, but they couldn't see, how I really felt or how I would react to a cut, like a specific cut, from, one shot to a next, if they weren't in the room with me.
Well, the editors don't get out as much. They're always at the they're always working up by the screen, usually by themselves.
I know,
You
I
got to
know.
give them a
So,
little bit of credit.
oh, of course. So, but I would give them notes like, okay, make the tone more, more slow here, or cut right at, 9:54 or whatever. And then that would be the only note. And it's like, what the hell do I do with, make the tone slower here? And it wasn't a fault of either of ours. Maybe I could be more descriptive in what I wanted, but I also didn't want to take away from the editor's original ideas and their creative part of it. Like I never want an editor, or I never want to direct a movie that's, I have an editor, but it's solely edited by me, if that makes sense. Where my editor doesn't get any say, or I'm just like steamrolling over them. I never want that. I want it to be a collaboration. So mainly just between transportation like locations, and communication was a big thing, and getting both visions to be unified with Bianca's and mine's, and even our visions sometimes would differ. So we would have four differing visions that
Sounds like a
we had,
nightmare.
yeah, that we somehow, plus, I'm not painting a sad song for myself, but plus, on top of schoolwork, on top of this, on top of jobs, it's not like we had every day to just, okay, let's figure this out. We had small times to, sleep on it, or to give in and go with someone else's vision. But I think it was just about seeing the larger picture. It was about seeing how this is going to end, in terms of the story. And we have A done, we have Z done, but then how do we get the rest of the alphabet to flow beautifully to hit those marks? So I think just pacing was a big thing, and just having a unified vision was huge. If anyone's thinking about having dual editors, I mean, it helped having a female and a male again, because one person would have one perspective. Like, uh, Gage would do a good job, even though sounding horrible, siding with him or seeing his perspective in a twisted way.
Maybe not even consciously too, right?
Yeah, as did I, right? And then Madison and Bianca would be more, okay, well, we're going to stay on this shot of her face because she's feeling like this. And it's like, oh my gosh, we automatically want to cut to the people that we know. Like Gage saw him as the main character, again, unconsciously. So he would cut it to almost be his story. And Madison saw her as the main character, so she would cut it to be her story. So it was finding that balance and finding that tone that unified and worked throughout.
All right, well, I think that it worked throughout pretty nicely. Last thing I'm going to ask you about. You got a neat little score put together for the film. Matthew Kalu putting together the music. Let's talk a little bit about that, because the music choices to me felt very, very like they felt like they were doing exactly what they needed to do. I like a little nod to the Happy Together song with the Happy Together title at the end.
I'm glad you noticed that. Yeah. So I could talk about that. Matt is, dude, Matt's a genius, especially, in terms of filmmaking. And then the score for this, he really, really knocked it out of the park. He would tell me all these big musical things that just went right over my head. And he would start talking about notes, and he would start talking about instruments. I have no idea, dude. Just make it sound good. But then I was like, yeah, dude, that works. Like, I trust you. And then he would send stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, that's what we need. Like, there's a scene where James is talking to Allison in the car, and I said I almost want it to sound like almost like a horror film, right? Like he's like this monster almost that comes up and scares her, and he has her trapped. So Matt did this. I can only describe it as like this alien kind of, not the movie, but like this alien kind of tone, this like horror kind of unsettling tone for this simple dramatic dialogue scene. Like on the surface, it's just like they're not even yelling, they're just having a simple conversation where they're trying to one up each other, but this tone is so off-putting, and it just makes you so uncomfortable. And I think Matt perfectly threaded the line between the audience being uncomfortable, instead of the audience being distracted by the music. You know what I mean? Like, you never really want an audience member to leave going, wow, the music was really good, because then, at that point, the music then took away from the story, or it overshadowed the story. You want the audience to be like, wow, that film was really good, and almost for them not even to notice the score, if that makes sense. And I think that's what Matt did beautifully. He had these subtle touches. I think they added to, again, the house of, like, you would expect that kind of nice, soft, beautiful music to be playing in the house, nothing over the top, right? This just subtle score. And then in the end, with the Happy Together tone, We always wanted the song Happy Together in there as, right at the end. I don't want to spoil too much, but right at the end. And Matt found a way to just change the end notes where, it's we're not going to get copywritten, we're not going to get in trouble for anything, but it still gives you that subtle feeling of like, I've heard this song before. This song, it gives me a little bit of a good feeling, but it's such a twisted way of playing with it and editing it. And I think this should give me a twisted feel, or this should give me a good feeling, but there's something a bit off, is really the crux of the whole story. Is this house, this person, this environment, these angles should give me this great feeling, but why do I feel so unsettled? And I think if it wasn't for Matt and his beautiful score, I think this film honestly would fall apart, or you would be so bored, like you would be watching things, and because he didn't have that beautiful, just subtle score in there keeping you on the edge of your seat, you would get distracted, because some scenes I would find myself a little bit distracted, and that's not taking anything away from the acting, the directing. It was just simply like, we need something here to fill this air, and we want to give this feeling. And I think Matt just like captured it beautifully, and I was really, really, really impressed with him.
All right, closing thoughts. Anything that you change about the film, looking back now that it's packaged, it's going around? Any little thing that if you could just put your hands everywhere and make different, if you had the budget, what would you change?
Hmm. If I could make it, we always had the idea that we wanted to make it longer. So I think 12 minutes is a nice length for a short film. But because of the pauses, and because of the subtleties, and because of the slow burn in terms of manipulation, I would have loved to have this story. And every director says this. I would have loved to have it be longer. I would have loved to have it be 15, 20 minutes. And then not even add that much more into it, but just take our time a little bit more. Maybe have a couple more lines of dialogue where it's just like he jabs her a little bit more, or she falls deeper and deeper into this idea of having that good relationship. I think if we had more days to shoot, get a little bit more coverage, a little bit more things to play with in the edit, and if we had just more time in terms of runtime, to, again, as you said, like the story escalates really quickly. I want to know how that relationship goes within the first 6 months there, because we kind of skip it. We go from the pool table scene where they first meet and they hook up to 6 months later. What happens in between that gap? How has he been planting the seeds, to have control over her? And although we see the first slap on camera, that's his first sign of actual physical abuse, is right then. What kind of mental abuse has he been putting her through the whole time? And I would have loved to explore further and further, and to had more time with the actors, and made it even more of a character study, and even more of a character piece, where you're just sitting with the characters and you're so uncomfortable for the full, say, 15, 20 minutes. So I know it sounds a bit cliche, but yeah, runtime I would love to have over again.
We'll save it for the director's cut then, right?
Yeah, we're gonna do a director's cut.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation. I know I certainly did. If you want to see the film for yourself, though, or keep up with it, please be sure to check out the description for details, or you can go to joshuacasale.com. That's JOSHUACASALE.com. Josh has also told me you can check out the film's Instagram page for the latest, which is at HappyTogetherShort. That's at HappyTogetherShort. Thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoyed, please make sure to support this podcast with a positive rating. You can follow the podcast on Instagram at @film_insights, or you can tweet me with @insightseden to let me know what you thought. Thank you so much for staying to the end. I've been Eden Ocean, and this has been Film Insights.